There is a substance that does not appear in the Galactic Cooperative Sphere's official registry of controlled compounds. It is not regulated. It is not restricted. It carries no import duties in any of the 47 Covenant signatory territories, no health advisories in any of the 31 Cooperative Sphere member systems, and no cautionary notation in the Thal-Mouri's comprehensive pharmacological database, which contains entries for 612,000 distinct biologically active compounds and is considered the most thorough such reference in the known galaxy. It is served freely and without warning at every human diplomatic function. It is offered to guests before negotiations begin, during recess periods, and at the conclusion of formal session. It is offered at informal meetings, cultural exchanges, scientific conferences, and trade summits. It is offered at memorial services, celebration ceremonies, and casual encounters in the corridors of human diplomatic facilities. It is, in the estimation of every non-human diplomat who has served in a posting that required regular contact with human counterparts, essentially inescapable. It is called coffee. The galaxy's official position on coffee is that it is a mild stimulant beverage of no particular significance, a cultural artifact of human hospitality, tradition with no strategic implications. The galaxy's unofficial position, shared in hushed tones in diplomatic back channels, in the personal logs of experienced envoys, in the break rooms of foreign ministries across 14 civilizations, is considerably more complicated. The unofficial position can be summarized as follows. Do not accept the coffee on the first visit. You will accept it on the second visit. After the second visit, it is already too late. This is the story of how it became too late for the entire galaxy. Now, the tradition did not begin in strategy or in battle. This is the most important thing to understand about coffee, and about humanity's relationship with it, and about what happened when those two things encountered the wider galaxy. It was not designed. It was not deployed. No committee sat in a room and decided that offering a specific beverage to alien delegations would be an effective tool of soft power. No diplomatic manual includes a chapter on the subject. The tradition began the way all the most consequential human things begin, organically, instinctively, because it was simply what humans did. Humans offered guests coffee. They had been doing it for centuries. Long before the galactic community knew they existed, long before FTL and cooperative sphere membership, and the extraordinary cascade of events that followed first contact, humans had been operating on a simple and deeply ingrained social principle. You welcome people into your space by offering them something warm to drink. The specific drink varied by culture and context and preference, but coffee was the one that had spread over the centuries, from its origins in a specific region of Earth to something close to a planetary constant, not universal. There were holdouts, preferences, alternatives, but close enough that by the time humanity was hosting alien delegations, offering coffee to visitors was as automatic and unconsidered as opening a door. Ambassador Yara Oze Menza, who was by this point a veteran of more alien contact situations than anyone else in human diplomatic history, had a coffee served in her office that she had been using for 26 years. It was not fancy. It was a good machine, well maintained, with a selection of beans from 40 continents. She offered it to everyone who came through her door. She had been offering it to everyone who came through her door since she was a junior attaché, with a small office and a modest salary, and she had continued offering it through every promotion and posting and historic diplomatic event of her career, without ever thinking of it as anything other than ordinary hospitality. She offered it to the first Vaelthari delegation. Vain Serath, who was across the table, accepted out of diplomatic courtesy. The human gesture of offering and receiving was well documented in their context, brief as a social ritual of significant importance, and refusing seemed inadvisable in the opening moments of a first formal exchange. She drank it. She processed the chemical composition automatically, as any being with a sophisticated biochemical awareness would, and identified the active compound, assessed their interaction with her neurotransmitter system, and noted, with the particular attention of someone who had just encountered something unexpected, that the compound designated CCI-HON-O was producing effects on her cognitive system that were not unpleasant. She finished the cup. She noticed that she had finished the cup. She noticed that Ambassador Ose Mensah was watching her with the expression of someone who had been through this before, and found it quietly satisfying. "Ah, another?" the ambassador asked. "Yes," Vaelthari said, before she had finished the calculation of whether that was a good idea. She wrote about it in her personal log that evening, not in the mission report. The mission report was professional and focused on the substantive diplomatic content of the exchange, as it should be. In the personal log, she wrote, "The humans offered a hot beverage at the start of the meeting. I accepted for diplomatic reasons. The compound is a xanthine alkaloid stimulant with wet secondary effects on dopaminergic pathway. It is, I want to be clear, entirely unremarkable from a pharmacological standpoint. There is nothing in its chemical profile that should produce the effect it produced." She paused. "I had a second cup. I am considering whether I should include in my next mission brief a note about the beverage. I have not yet decided how to characterize it. I am currently describing it to myself as notable. This seems insufficiently precise, but I do not have a better word. I am also, I note, thinking about it in a way that suggests I'm looking forward to the next meeting." She closed the log. She opened it again. "The meeting is scheduled for Thursday. Thursday is 4 days away. This seems like a long time." She closed the log again and did not reopen it, because she was a professional, and she had a mission report to complete, and 4 days was not, objectively, a long time. She counted the days anyway. The thing about coffee, the thing that the galaxy would eventually understand, too late, with the fond resignation of someone who has been outmaneuvered by something that wasn't even trying, is that it is not simply a stimulant. Every civilization in the cooperative sphere had stimulants. Most had several. The Keth-Vraal had a compound derived from a specific deep-sea organism that produced a 3-hour window of enhanced aggression and focus favored by their warrior class. The Solenne Emperor had 17 distinct mood-modifying compounds regulated under their pharmaceutical authority, all of which were significantly more potent than coffee in their primary effects. The Thal-Mouri had a meditative preparation that induced states of cognition they had been documenting and analyzing for 3,000 years. The Vaelthari had their own stimulant traditions, well established, effective, and precisely calibrated to their biochemistry. None of them had coffee, because coffee was not, primarily, a stimulant. It was an experience. This was what took the galaxy time to understand, because the galaxy was accustomed to thinking of substances in terms of their active compounds and their pharmacological effects, and coffee's active compounds and pharmacological effects were, by those metrics, unremarkable. Mild alertness, minor mood elevation, nothing that any other civilization's chemistry couldn't match or exceed. But coffee was also the smell, the specific, irreplaceable, deeply complex smell that somehow, through mechanisms that food scientists had studied for centuries without fully resolving, produced an immediate and powerful sense of warmth and anticipation and comfort that was almost entirely independent of whether you had ever consumed the substance before. Coffee was also the ritual, the preparation, the specific sequence of actions, grinding, brewing, waiting, that imposed a brief enforced pause on whatever you were doing before, a transition between states, a small ceremony that said, this moment is different from the moment before it. This moment we are here, in this space, with these people, attending to this. Coffee was also the conversation. The particular quality of conversation that happened over coffee, which was different from the conversation that happened over a conference table, or in a formal meeting room, or standing in a corridor. Coffee conversation was the conversation that happened when guards were slightly down and a formal agenda was slightly loosened, and people were warm and alert and present in a specific way. Coffee was also the cup itself, held in two hands, a posture of reception and comfort that appeared with remarkable consistency across human cultures, and now, increasingly, across alien ones. The Vaelthari were first, because they were first at everything involving humanity, but the Thal-Mouri were close behind. They received a shipment of human coffee beans as part of a cultural exchange, and spent 6 weeks writing philosophical analyses of the beverage before anyone thought to actually make some. No. And then wrote another 12 weeks of philosophical analysis afterward, significantly more enthusiastic in tone. The Solenne Emperor tried it during a state visit to the human diplomatic quarter on the cooperative sphere's central station. He had 1 cup. Yeah, I asked for a second. He had a brief conversation with Ambassador Ozi Mensa, who was, he noted, entirely unsurprised by his response, and then he asked, with the directness of a person who has decided to simply ask the thing they are thinking, how long have you known this would work on us? We didn't know it would work on you, she said honestly. We knew it worked on us. We offered it because it seemed hospitable. The rest was, she smiled. Pleasant surprise. For what, said he? He looked at his cup. You gave this to the Vaelthari first, he said. We give it to everyone, she said. We gave it to the first delegation that came through the door, and we've been giving it to every delegation since. And it always worked. She considered this. It doesn't always work the same way. Some species love it immediately. Some need a few tries. A few don't respond to it at all. The Kawau, Verath, for instance, the biochemistry isn't compatible. She paused. But for most, yes. There's something in it that seems to translate. He thought about that. What is it? He asked. In your estimation, what is the thing that translates? She was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone who has thought about something for a long time, and has developed an answer they're still refining. I think it's the pause, she said finally. We are all, always, in the middle of things. Negotiations, crises, decisions, arguments, plans, but coffee doesn't resolve any of those things. It just stops them, briefly. Creates a moment where you are simply sitting with another person, holding something warm, not required to perform, or decide, or achieve. And in that moment, she looked at her own cup. In that moment, it is possible to remember that the person across the table is a person, not a representative or an adversary or an interest to be managed. A person who is also right now in the middle of things. Nataki, Europe, and fear. The emperor was quiet. That is either the most innocent diplomatic strategy I have encountered, he said, or the most sophisticated. What if it's both? She said. The first formal acknowledgement that coffee had become a galactic phenomenon of significance appeared, with considerable understatement, in a cooperative sphere. Cultural Exchange Report filed in the 22nd year of humanity's membership. The report's relevant section was titled, Human Hospitality Traditions, Beverage Practices. It was 3 paragraphs long. It noted, in the dry language of PISA, administrative documentation, that the human practice of offering a hot beverage designated coffee at diplomatic functions had been adopted in varying forms by 11 cooperative sphere member civilizations, and that requests for human coffee supplies had increased by 400% over the preceding 5 years, making it the cooperative sphere's fastest growing non-essential trade commodity. Non-essential was doing a lot of work in that sentence. The report had been written by a junior analyst who had, somewhat innocently, used the phrase without fully appreciating what it revealed. Because the civilizations importing human coffee at 400% growth rates were not treating it as non-essential. The Vaelthari diplomatic corps had, by this point, a dedicated coffee service in every one of their 14 primary embassy facilities. The Thal-Mouri had integrated coffee ceremonies into their meditative practice tradition, a development that their philosophical community was still actively debating, not whether it belonged there, but what it meant that it belonged there. The Keth-Vraal warrior academies had adopted a pre-session coffee ritual that their instructors swore improved the quality of strategic thinking in morning briefings. The new Providence Colony Administrator's Office had coffee in the title of the footnote of its galactic registration entry for it, reasons that were, by now, widely understood. The phrase that circulated, increasingly, in diplomatic back channels was, "Have you had the coffee yet?" It was said always by someone who had to someone who hadn't, and it was said with a quality that defied easy categorization, a blend of warmth and amusement, and something that, in any human language, would have been called affection, but which the galactic community was still developing vocabulary for. The second formal acknowledgement came 12 years later, in a security assessment filed by the Vaelthari hegemony's intelligence division. It was significantly less understated than the cultural exchange report. The assessment was classified. It remains classified. But a summary was shared, under diplomatic protocols, with the human cooperative sphere's diplomatic division, and Ambassador O.C. Mensah, by this point retired, but consulted as a matter of standing practice on anything involving the Vaelthari, read it in her study in Accra, and laughed for a solid 3 minutes before composing her official response. The summary said, in essence, the Vaelthari hegemony's intelligence division has completed a review of the cultural and diplomatic impact of the human beverage, designated coffee. The review finds that the beverage has, over a period of approximately 20 years, produced measurable changes in the conduct of diplomatic negotiations involving human counterparts, including increased willingness to adopt informal rather than formal register, increased incidence of extended interpersonal conversation beyond agenda parameters, increased recall of human diplomatic counterparts as individuals rather than representatives, and increased general disposition toward human positions across a range of negotiating contexts. The review notes that these effects appear to be the result not of the beverage's pharmacological properties, but of the social and ceremonial context in which it is offered and consumed. The review's conclusion is that the coffee tradition constitutes, whether intentionally or not, one of the most effective instruments of diplomatic soft power currently operating in the cooperative sphere. Recommendation: continue accepting the coffee. The alternative, refusing a gesture of hospitality that has become embedded in 47 years of diplomatic relationship, carries higher costs than the influence risk. Additionally, the coffee is genuinely very good. Secondary recommendation: conduct further research into whether the human practice of offering warm beverages to visitors has analogs in other human social traditions that may have similar effects. Initial assessment suggests yes. Ambassador Oze Mensah's official response to the summary was 3 sentences. Thank you for sharing this. We have never thought of coffee as a diplomatic instrument. What? We offer it because we like you and we want you to be comfortable. She paused, then added a 4th sentence. but we are very glad you enjoy it. The designation of coffee as the galaxy's most feared tradition was, to be precise about it, a joke. It was made by a Keth-Vraal junior diplomat at a cooperative sphere cultural symposium in a presentation on cross-civilizational social customs. And it was received with the particular laughter of an audience that recognized something true in the framing and found the recognition funny. The Keth-Vraal presenter had said, "In our warrior tradition, we have a concept for the weapon that you cannot defend against, not because it is too strong, but because defending against it requires you to become something you do not want to be. The human's coffee is this. You can refuse it once. You cannot refuse it forever. And if you refuse it forever, you have refused hospitality, refused warmth, refused the small ceremony that says, we are people together for a moment, before we are adversaries. Again, this is why we call it feared, not because it harms us, because it works." Up. The audience laughed. The presenter smiled, the precise smile of someone who meant what they said, and was glad it landed as comedy. The phrase, the galaxy's most feared tradition, became the informal designation within 3 years. It appeared in cultural exchange reports, in diplomatic training materials, in the personal logs of envoys from 14 civilizations. It was, in the way of all the best jokes, both funny and accurate. But the truest account of what coffee had become, the one that Vaelthari, who was by this point the Secretary General of the Sanctuary Authority, and who had developed over years of working with humans the particular fondness of someone who has been consistently surprised in good ways. The truest account was not the joke. It was something quieter. Vaelthari had a specific memory. It was from the negotiations following the Vaelthari engagement, the aftermath, the months of complex, difficult, emotionally freighted discussions between the Keth-Vraal government, the sanctuary population, the warden force, and the authority, discussions that required working through 40 years of exile and conflict and grief, and the particular complexity of a situation where almost everyone involved had legitimate grievances and legitimate fear. The discussions were hard. They were supposed to be hard. They were supposed to be hard. Hard was appropriate. But there were moments when the hardness threatened to collapse into something that wasn't productive hardness, the brittleness that came from too much formal register, too much performance of positions, too many hours of people being representatives instead of people. And at those moments, without fail, without planning, without anyone deciding it was a strategy, the human contingent would call a recess. And in the recess, someone would appear with a coffee service. Simple, good, enough for everyone. And people would take the cups and hold them in 2 hands and stand in small groups and talk about things that were not on the agenda, and something in the room would shift slightly toward the human register rather than the diplomatic one. And then they would go back to the table, and the discussions would be, slightly and consistently and cumulatively, more likely to reach the thing they were reaching for. Vaelthari had watched this happen 17 times across 3 months of negotiations. They had eventually asked the human lead about. The human lead, a young diplomat named Aditi Raman, who had been in the Corps for 8 years and who had a quality of warmth that Vaelthari associated with the best of the human diplomats they had encountered, the ones who were genuinely good at this rather than just competent, had looked slightly surprised by the question. "It's just coffee," she said. "Yes," Vaelthari said, "but you always offer it at exactly the right moment." Aditi thought about this. "We offer it when people look like they need it," she said. "When they've been being official for too long. When they're forgetting that the person across the table also probably had a hard morning and is also doing their best and is also..." She stopped. She looked at her cup. "When they need to remember that we're all in this together." even when we're disagreeing. Attachés, Edwardian, and yet. Vaelthari thought about that. It's very simple, they said. Most of the important things are, added he said. In the cooperative sphere's cultural exchange registry, updated annually, there is an entry that has been growing every year for 30 years. It is titled Coffee, Distribution and Cultural Adoption Status. The current entry notes that coffee is now cultivated, under license, and with agricultural technology transfer from human partners in 7 non-human star systems, that it is served at formal diplomatic functions in 31 of the 47 covenant signatory territories, that it has been incorporated into ceremonial and ritual contexts in 9 distinct non-human cultural traditions, that it is the subject of 63 academic papers, 2 philosophical treatises, 1 Thal-Mouri epic poem of considerable length, and a Keth-Vraal martial art incorporating the cup-holding gesture that has 17,000 registered practitioners. The entry's final line, added by the registry administrator as a note rather than formal data, reads, Coffee remains the only trade commodity in cooperative sphere history to be simultaneously categorized as a food product, a cultural artifact, a diplomatic instrument, and informally, a tradition. All 4 categorizations are correct. None of them is sufficient. In a small cafe in the human diplomatic quarter of the cooperative sphere's central station, a cafe that has been operating for 22 years, that has served coffee to beings from 31 civilizations, that has a wall covered in drawings and notes and small offerings left by visitors across 2 decades, there is a table near the window that is always, by unspoken understanding, kept available, not for any official purpose, not reserved for anyone in particular, just available. It is, everyone who works in the diplomatic quarter knows, the table where things get resolved. Right? Not formally, not officially, not in any way that appears in any record or protocol or history, just 2 people or 3 or 4 cups of coffee, the window, an hour, and afterward, back to the table where the formal work happens, carrying something that wasn't there before. Coordinator Blessing, Okafor Singh of New Providence Colony, retired now in her 70s, visiting the central station for the first time since the first time registration ceremony 20 years ago, found herself at the cafe on her second day. She sat at the window table because it was available and the light was good. She ordered coffee. The being who brought it was not human, a young Vaelthari, in their first posting, learning the diplomatic quarters rhythms. They set the cup down with the careful attention of someone performing a small ceremony, which was, Okafor Singh had come to understand, what all coffee service was. Thank you, she said. The young Vaelthari looked at the cup, then at her with the expression of someone who was still learning how to be in the world, but was paying close attention. Is it true, they said, that humans have been doing this, offering the coffee, since before you knew we existed? Since long before, she said. You just offered it to everyone. We like people to feel welcome, she said simply. The young Vaelthari considered this for a moment. We analyzed it, they said. The intelligence division, the cultural teams. We tried to understand what the strategy was. Yes, what did you conclude? That there wasn't one. They paused. That you just... They searched for the word. That you just meant it. Yes, she said. Another pause. Nee? That was the part, the young Vaelthari said quietly, that none of the analyses could quite account for. Okafor Singh smiled. She picked up her cup. She held it in both hands, in the old way, in the warm way. Outside the window, the central station hummed with the business of 31 civilizations doing the complicated, imperfect, ongoing work of existing alongside each other It usually is, she said.